invited to this conference months ago by our dearly beloved friend and brother, John Veneri. And I got to say, it's very difficult for me to even get used to conferences such as this. This is my first one without John on board. So just by way of premising my talk on Fatima, the Apparitions, in the areas of Russia, I dedicate it to John, to his memory. I ask you to remember him in your prayers. Obviously, you all know and love him too, so that's an easy request on my part. I know I wouldn't be here today if it weren't for John's invitation, of course, because he invited me before he passed away. I also don't know that I would be here in spirit with respect to Fatima and the importance of the Fatima message today, were it not for John's example. As a brother and a friend, he was a little older than I am, but he really believed, lived and breathed Fatima every single moment of every day. And that example has led me to share in his idea that there really is nothing more important than the message of Our Lady of Fatima. So if you would do, in your kindness and in your charity, remember him in your prayers. I'm very honored to be here at this conference. I hope that these conferences on Fatima continue. I suspect they will, as the situation in the church becomes worse and the message and prophecies of Our Lady become fulfilled more all the time. I'm also very honored to join you today as we mark the 300th anniversary of the establishment of Freemasonry. The foundation of the Grand Lodge having been established in London back in 1717. I know most of you are here for that reason. 100 years ago today, then, when Our Lady appeared first at the Cova, the Freemasons of Europe were busy celebrating the 200th anniversary of their secret society. Christophobic and anti-Catholic to the core, condemned by more popes than any other single organization in the history of the church, established to uncrown Christ the King, to topple the crowned heads of Christendom, and to set up the heresy of self-rule that we so proudly proclaim now in our own day and age. A heresy which entails the total rejection of the kingship of Christ. Now these days, of course, it's very fun to poo-poo the Masonic conspiracy. That's the stuff of kooky people on the internet, black helicopters, tinfoil hats, and the rest. But ladies and gentlemen, it's so important. If you don't understand, and if you're rightly deceived, the Freemasons are very deceptive. And so you have shrine circuses, and you have hospitals, and you have these wonderful things, these humanitarian efforts that have done a magnificent job covering the reality of this dark force that was intended and established to destroy the church. So it's popular to dismiss that as kooky stuff nowadays. But a few years ago, popes, intellectuals, bishops, priests, informed Catholics all over the world were certainly not mocking the secret society's plots to destroy the church. I don't know if you think of Father Maximilian Kolbe as a kook, but if you do, then you might as well leave this conference. He certainly was not a kook. He certainly understood full well the threat of the Freemasonic societies. In fact, 100 years ago this year, 1917, Father Maximilian Kolbe witnessed and wrote about a Masonic procession in Rome which carried banners, had this with the slogan written on the banners, "Satan must reign in the Vatican, the Pope will be his slave." Kolbe saw this, witnessed this, wrote it down, talked about it, reported on it, and turned to Our Lady as the answer to this growing threat against the church. One of my own family's newspapers, Don mentioned the Wanderer, was established 150 years ago this year as well, and it was established largely on commission from Leo XIII, who told and instructed the Catholic press, specifically the German Catholic press, to be wary of the workings and the machinations of the secret society against German immigrants. So even the Wanderer itself, this newspaper that's now very venerable, 150 years old, the oldest weekly in the United States, was founded to a large extent in answer to what the secret societies were doing that we all like to dismiss as the stuff of the church lady. So we're actually more or less giving away our own ignorance when we make fun of the funny hats and the fezzes and Richie Cunningham's dad and all that stuff and dismiss Freemasonry as not a threat at all. We simply don't know what we're talking about. And it's not difficult to learn that. So, papal encyclical after papal encyclical condemned Freemasonry, warned of the secret societies, But the devil's greatest accomplishment, as we all know, is to make us think he doesn't exist. And the same thing has happened with Freemasonry. But what Father Colby saw in that procession in Rome, what the papal encyclicals were targeting year after year, decade after decade, century after century since the 18th century, what the great popes were warning against was in fact the errors of Russia, against which the Mother of God herself finally came down from heaven to warn us. That's how important and significant this issue is, and it's why I think there's a connection between the anniversary of Fatima and the anniversary of the establishment of Freemasonry. Of course, we could go into also the 100th anniversary of our entrance into the First World War, which is also significant to Fatima, but we're limited for time. Of course, we're all here today then for a much happier reason, and that's to celebrate Fatima's 100th anniversary. And it's all connected. Fatima, you could argue, is perhaps the most geopolitical apparition in history. It involves considerations and even warnings involving historical wars, a prophecy that the Second World War was coming, systems of economics and government, warnings of international calamities, and even the annihilation of nations. Fatima is not a pious devotion based on some sort of private revelation that we are free to dismiss. You all know this. Every pope back to Fatima has visited Fatima. It has its own feast day. Pope Francis is in Fatima right now. It is absolutely more than merely a private revelation. It's the most important event that happened in the 20th century, hands down. And the Church, depending on the Pope, has acknowledged that one way or the other, but certainly that is the case. And this greatest event that happened in the 20th century, the story of Fatima, has not yet played out. We don't know how it ends. It's kind of why we're here, to find out how it ends. But the battle over Fatima rages on. I couldn't believe it when I was at the last conclave covering the election of Pope Francis, and he had his first audience from the little window, which he doesn't use as much anymore. First thing I hear out of his ears is out of his mouth, Our Lady of Fatima. And I thought, boy, here we go again. He was referencing a book on Our Lady of Fatima, but again, she continues to come back into the narrative and into the consideration, even with popes who are not following her orders when it comes to the consecration of Russia. But she's still there. No matter how the world, the flesh, and the devil, and the Vatican, by the way, try to bury Our Lady of Fatima, there is no way to silence the Mother of God. Thank God for that. She operates independently even of the human element of the church, which is why no matter how bad things get in the church today, no matter how scandalous things become, we have utter confidence, we who try, who at least pledge fidelity to her and try to remain faithful to her, we have utter confidence that if we stay close to her, if we pray the rosary, if we wear the scapular, we are confident that despite everything, all the wars and all the talks of new world orders and apostasy all around us, despite it all, we are under her protection. We're under her mantle. We have hope and comfort in her. We know that we can persevere through her because she's at our side. And this is why we talked about the Chartres pilgrimage. This is one of the reasons I go to that pilgrimage. Because here's the world raging. Here's terrorism all over, tearing apart the eldest daughter of the church. There are now more Muslims in Paris than there are Frenchmen. There are very few people in France practicing the faith. Complete chaos. And yet every year, this little procession of 15,000 people from all over the world pick up her statues, pick up her banners, salute her, and pledge fidelity to her. And there's nothing like it. They have total confidence, and they're mostly 20 years old. The average age is 20, because she gives them that confidence. People who turn to her will be victorious short-term and long-term as that pilgrimage continues to grow and grow and grow. So what a consolation Our Lady is. What a consolation Fatima is. Imagine for just a second, as I was writing this talk, a thought came to me. What if we had never heard of Our Lady of Fatima? Just imagine for a second a world without Fatima. What would that be like? Those of you who are a little older, who grew up as traditional Catholics as I did, we grew up with her. We grew up with this lady. I mean, every day, all the time. She's been sitting on the mantle. Now she's on the mantle where my children and I pray every single night. It looks just like that, only it's tiny. She's been part of our lives forever. What if she weren't there? What if her message wasn't there? And most importantly, perhaps, what if her warnings and prophecies had never been left to the world? Because what do? They arm us. Our Lady of Fatima helps us to get out of bed every morning in this world in upheaval, in this church under siege and apostasy. She helps us get up every morning because we're not surprised by it, because she warned the world that this was happening. Nothing happens today that we didn't anticipate, that she didn't anticipate, and then she didn't share with those children who shared it with the world, and now we expected it, we anticipated, we prayed it wouldn't happen, but when it came, we didn't despair, thanks to her. She gave us the heads up. She knew that this was coming. So how can we be surprised by the apostasy going on all around us right now? And that's what it is. It's the great apostasy. Even John Paul admitted that by the end. The church is going through an apostasy. How can we be surprised by that when Our Lady says that strange phrase, a little thing, but the dogma of the faith will be preserved in Portugal? What's the but doing there? If it's not for the fact that other nations will lose the faith completely. She warned us, in other words, that this day is coming. So Fatima was certainly not a failure just because the third secret hasn't been, I don't believe, revealed. The consecration hasn't happened yet. It certainly was not a failure. You're all here. We're all here. And for years to come, as the situation gets worse, she emerges as the prophet of our day, the prophetess of our time, the Mother of God, told us this was coming. And so there's this supreme irony then. The more they try to silence her, the more her prophecy is fulfilled, the more she's vindicated, the more we recognize the need to stay close to her, to love her, to revere her, to trust in her, to become her little children again, to lose the sophistication of the modernists, to fall on our knees. As you have to do if you've ever visited Bethlehem and you want to see the place where Jesus was born, you have to get down on your knees like a little child in order to get there. Our Lady helps us to get to that point of throwing off the sophistication, questioning everything, seizing her rosary, her mantle, and believing. Total trust in Our Lady makes us, in other words, into the humble children of God that we need in order to save our souls. Amen, I say to you, unless you be converted and become as little children, you shall not enter the kingdom of heaven. Our Lady puts a high price, I think. I think Our Lady appreciates very much those who are little children and those who can be like little children. Not childish, but childlike. And that's what being Catholic really at the end of the day is all about. The faith of a child. Not growing up in our faith to the point where we question everything and lose all hope. Fatima, in other words, emerges as so vital, so key to our salvation. I'm going to Fatima. I'm being blessed very much to take about 50 American pilgrims to Fatima just in a couple of weeks. And I'm always so excited to go there because we have a lot of young people, and this is a great little classroom to start talking about what's happened to our church. Because Fatima, it was made famous, first of all, by these little children, not by the intellectuals of the day or the power brokers and so forth, but by little children watching sheep. So right away, it's a story that children can immediately appreciate. My own children play Fatima all the time. They run up by the statue and put those little Jacinta veils on, and they kneel there playing Fatima when they're little girls. They love that. So Fatima's an easy story to tell. But Fatima also separates Mary's children from the worldly and sophisticated critics of her son. The modernists, the liberals, the progressives, versus those who, along with the Angel of Portugal, can say and mean, my God, I believe, I adore, I trust, and I love you, and I beg pardon for those who don't. All the way until the end of their lives, they can retain that childlike belief, say that prayer, and mean it. Fatima also stands as a metaphor for the larger war, the universal war in the Catholic Church. Everything about Fatima is a metaphor. Its history, its message, the layout of its shrine itself, it all brings into focus the war. We're part of the church militant. I know it's not popular in the world that Pope Francis built, but we are at war, and the church is a fortress. And this is the church militant for a reason. So Fatima brings that home. It brings home the revolution and the counter-revolution. The shrine itself, for those of you who have been, it's a battlefield. It's laid out like a battlefield. It struck me when I was there for the first time. You have at the one end this beautiful basilica, something that any saint would recognize. Beautiful in architecture, the statues, the stained glass, perfect. 15 altars in the shrine, representing 15 decades of the rosary. Not 20, 15 decades of the rosary. Images of the saints, of Pius XII in the stained glass, of the tombs of two children. This is what's going on at one end of this battlefield. And then consider what's going on at the other end of the battlefield. It represents the modernist invasion of the church, doesn't it? There's this hideous monstrosity, which is called the Pope Paul, well, not Pope, but just the Paul VI Pastoral Center. It is ugly. I'm talking butt ugly. It's an ugly, ugly building. It's designed clearly by men who thought a sophisticated world would see it as an alternative to those old pious traddy things that are in the basilica at the other end. And this horrible thing, which I don't know how to I think John Bernari called it a cake, or somebody called it a tennis racket. It's really hard. There's lots of different things. But it is flanked by two statues, two big statues. One of Pope John Paul the Great, and the other of Pope Paul VI. Flanking this thing and facing Our Lady of Fatima, facing the basilica at the far end of the battlefield. Right next to them, next to John Paul, is the most ugly, I dare say, sacrilegious crucifix I've ever seen in my life. So if you want to Google it, it's unbelievable. It would be an act of divine justice if that bad boy were struck by lightning. I mean, it's that bad. At this far end of the field, this is no place for children. Children don't go there. Even tourists tend not to. It's horrible. There's nothing there. Little Jacinta of Fatima, she would have been frightened in that place. And yet that's at the other end. So I hope you get the picture here. That's what's going on down here. Over here, you got all this trad stuff at the far end. In the middle, like a referee, is a statue of our Lord, the Sacred Heart. And you see both sides sort of pushing and pulling, both sides claiming him. Only the traditional sides, he's with them. He's facing the same direction that Our Lady faces against the statues of John Paul and Pope Paul VI. So you have at Fatima, in other words, old church versus new church carved into the very architecture. Old orientation versus new orientation. It's all there. Two worlds colliding at the very spot where the Mother of God appeared to warn that wars were coming, that the faith of entire nations was at risk, that the Holy Father would have much to suffer, and that many souls would be lost. Our Lady of Fatima came to tell us of the beginning of a rebellion. Not the beginning, but the outing of a rebellion. Rebellious men coming out of the closet, if you will, against the old Catholic order and the establishment of a new world order. Founded not on the rights of God, but on the rights of man, and based on the total rejection of the kingship of Christ. Now, a few years before Our Lady appeared, the absolute, uncontested, greatest pope of the 20th century, St. Pius X, wrote an encyclical letter anticipating Our Lady of Fatima's warnings. It's a little bit of a longer quote, but I'm going to read it to you. Quote, "There is good reason to fear lest this great perversity, this rebellion against God, may be a foretaste and perhaps the beginning of those evils which are reserved for the last day, and that there may already be in the world the son of perdition, of whom the apostle speaks. Such in truth is the audacity and the wrath employed everywhere in persecuting religion, in combating the dogmas of the faith, in resolute effort to uproot and destroy all relations between man and the divinity, while on the other hand, and this according to the same apostle is the distinguishing mark of the Antichrist, man has with infinite temerity put himself in the place of God, raising himself above all that is called God, in such wise that although he cannot utterly extinguish in himself all knowledge of God, he has nevertheless condemned God's majesty, and as it were, made of the universe a temple wherein he himself is to be adored. He sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself as if he were God." End quote, so says St. Pius X, a prophet who saw everything that we're living through today. What is he describing here? In my opinion, he's describing the errors of Russia, the Christophobic, anti-Christian, anti-Catholic errors of Russia. And not long after he describes that temple in which God is thrown out and man enters, we see what? In the liturgy of Holy Mother Church, we see dramatic changes which reflect another revolution, do we not? In which the tabernacle itself is set off to the side or removed altogether, and a chair for the man is set in the place where God used to be. Where the altar of sacrifice was ripped out by bulldozers, and a communal table of man was set in its place. Pope Pius X is predicting the revolution in the Catholic Church, most assuredly. And it always strikes me as not insignificant that at Fatima, before Vatican II, the most prominent statues that the pilgrims saw when he came was a statue of Our Lady and a statue of the Sacred Heart. At Fatima, after Vatican II, there are other prominent statues, perhaps as prominent, and that is of those of Pope John Paul II and Pope Paul VI, standing like Greek or Roman gods in the holy place. Why? What are the popes doing there? Even Pius XII isn't there. Even Pius XI isn't there. Why are those two popes set there in Fatima with such majesty and such decorum? The principal representatives, are they not, of a new orientation, of a new order, of a new Mass, of a new council, a new rosary, a new catechism, right? Everything's new, and eventually a new and improved understanding of Fatima. We gather here today to make vows of rejection to those errors of Russia, to pray the rosary, to go to the traditional Latin Mass, to express our fidelity to the Mother of God, and to beg her intercession because the hour is late and the world is blowing up. I flew from Minneapolis to Cleveland last night, and I wondered when there was a fight was going to break out or some Islamic guy having a bad day was going to take the pilot out. We're all living now in that sort of fear. Might be a good idea. I mean, Paris, oh my gosh, there are parents, because we take young people to the pilgrimage, and they're really worried that pilgrimage is going to be hit by jihadists. And who knows, maybe. That's the world in which we live. I say this not to be sensationalist. You all watch the news. You know what's going on out there. It's insane. It's insane. But I say it because I think now might be a pretty good time to take Fatima seriously for us personally, if we want to survive this, because her intercession is powerful, as we know. Christ is the mediator between God and humanity. She is the mediatrix between us and Christ. And if there's anything we need right now, it's Christ. He's outlawed. He's banned. He's a hater. He's not even allowed in our schools anymore. So we need a way to get to him, and she's the way to get to him, Our Lady of Fatima. So when she says, pray the rosary, she's not saying it because she wants us to be pious little church ladies and she thinks she gets a kick out of the rosary. She's saying it for a reason. And if we only knew history, we would understand exactly why she said that. We would understand exactly the urgency in which we need to answer the call now for our own good. Not to be pious little people necessarily, but to save our lives and to save the lives of our children. That's what she's talking about. She's trying to save our lives and our souls primarily, but our lives as well, when she asks for this. So she says, pray the rosary. She says, pray the rosary. Because she's the only way out. She's the only hope. And the further this goes down the rabbit hole, the more evident that's going to be that she's the only way out. It's nothing else matters. There's nothing else we can do. We can't appeal to some political answer. God love the Donald, but I don't think any of us actually think Trump is going to get us out of this mess. Please, God, pray for the man. I hope he can do something. At this point, the demons aren't letting him do anything, so obviously a spiritual component needs to be injected into American politics right away, because poor Donald Trump is going to make 4 years if this continues. So that's not the answer. It's not Pope Francis. God save us all. I don't know what he's up to. But I don't think he's the answer unless he has a conversion, so we pray for his conversion, or that God takes him home soon. I don't think there's anything wrong with praying that. So we don't have any other answer. I don't know what any other answer is. Sure, there's short-term things we can do. We can homeschool, we can come out of the public school system, we can do things like that. But ultimately, she gives us the answer, as she always has, as she's done again and again and again. And at the risk of boring you, I'm going to review a little of the history of what she's done for us in the past, what she did for our fathers in the faith, our fathers and mothers in history. Because maybe then, if we spread some of these stories and we remind ourselves about what she's capable of, we will take her a little bit more seriously. So everybody's afraid, as I said. We're all afraid of those guys with the turbans and the dynamite things and the black pajamas and all that, and doing the Muslim guys, the crazy jihadist people. We're afraid of those guys. They're scary people. Well, what we fear today is no different than what happened a long time ago with with people in the past who faced the same enemy, the exact same enemy. So Our Lady comes to Fatima, right, for a reason. Everybody wants to say, well, that's because Our Lady is all into religious dialogue and ecumenism, and so Muhammad's daughter was Fatima, therefore Fatima is all about ecumenism and dialogue forever. That's hogwash. That's nonsense. Fatima is not the town, the little area. It's not named after the prophet's daughter. It's named after a Moorish princess who converted in order to marry a conquistador, to marry a knight at the time of the Reconquista. Nobody wants to talk about that because it's politically incorrect. She converted to Catholicism, in other words. And that's what Fatima is named after. So if we want to talk about anything that the name of the village represents, it would be Mary's triumph again and again over the Crescent, over Islam, over the Moors down through history. So again, we feel helpless today, flying and doing everything else. Our borders are disappearing and we're being overrun and the threat of terrorism. But again, it wouldn't have been any worse than what our fathers and mothers back in the 8th century, the Franks, would have felt when the jihad was going strong at that point. But their leader, Charles Martel, was Catholic. And so he stood up and presented a Catholic solution, battle and prayer. Prayer to Our Lady especially. And so he wins the great battle of Poitiers. He saves his country and his people from the jihad of that time. And he attributes that victory solely to the intercession of Our Lady. And then he goes on to name the first order, the first order of chivalry, Our Lady of the Star, in which every knight was required to recite 50 Hail Marys moving forward every single day. He was so committed to her and so convinced that had it not been for her intercession, they would have been destroyed. So Charlemagne, the great Christendom's great king, placed himself under the protection of Our Lady, whose image, by the way, he wore around his neck constantly. And in 778, following his campaign in Spain, he was blocked in the Pyrenees, way down in the south of France, by a fortress held by a Saracen prince named Murat. He was so discouraged, Charlemagne was, that he was about ready to lift the siege and move back, when his chaplain, the Bishop of Le Puy, after fervently imploring the aid of Our Lady of Le Puy, was granted permission to enter that fortress and act as intermediary. And the story is amazing, and it's very well documented by historians. Here's what happened. Standing before Murat, the Bishop of Le Puy told him, quote, "Since you do not wish to surrender to Charlemagne, the greatest of princes, at least recognize as sovereign that most noble of all ladies that ever was, Sainte Marie de Le Puy, Mother of God. I am her servant. You be her knight." End quote. Not very ecumenical, but guess what? It worked. So miraculously, incredibly, Murat declares that he was ready to surrender his arms on the spot as a servant to the servant of Our Lady, the Bishop of Le Puy, and to receive baptism, under the condition that at all times, he doubles down, under the condition that at all times in future generations, he and his descendants would hold their earldom directly from Our Lady. Charlemagne ratifies the agreement, and Murat was baptized by the Bishop of Le Puy, and his name henceforth became Lourdes, which you may recognize means the rose in Arabic, and it has since become Lourdes. The Christian reconquest of France, in other words, was therefore marked by Our Lady of Roses a long time ago, exactly as Saint Bernadette described her when she first saw Our Lady at Massabielle, taking possession of the lands at Lourdes, the fief of Le Puy. The origin of the Salve Regina, anybody familiar with that? It just makes you want to weep. It's so beautiful. This is Hail Holy Queen. We all say it after every rosary. Salve Regina. Ademar de Montiel, another bishop of Le Puy, was preaching the first crusade. It was promoted by Urban II, of course, and he's the one who composed the great Salve Regina, which became the rallying song of the Crusaders on their departure for the Holy Land in 1096. Our Lady, thus immediately and throughout all Christendom, became an integral part of the struggle against the infidel of their day. And later, St. Bernard, who was the author of the Memorare, of course, and he wrote the final verse of the Salve Regina, he preached the Second Crusade, placing it too under the protection of Our Lady, who was invoked in the Salve Regina constantly, incessantly by marching crusaders setting out in 1149. And this tradition has continued to this day. When we walk the pilgrimage to Chartres, You walk for 2.5 days. I think it's on the third day, after a grueling walk, sleeping on the ground, you're exhausted, you're wiped out. The afternoon of the second day it is, you see way over on the horizon 2 tiny little spires, Notre Dame de Chartres. And every pilgrim, 15,000, when they see that, they fall on their knees and they sing the Salve Regina for the very same reason that the Crusaders would have. Put themselves in her army, to fight for her, to dedicate themselves to her. Everything they do is for her. So it survives. Well, it survived in traditionalist circles. The new church no longer uses the Salve Regina, of course. How about the Angelus? It's another fun thing that's gone the way of the Latin Mass and the dodo bird, by the way, for most people. But the history of the Angelus has an Islamic and Our Lady connection that's rather interesting. In 1095, at the Council of Clermont, Pope Urban II requested that the bells of all the churches of Christendom and the cathedrals in the Christian world would be rung each morning and evening, calling the faithful to pray to Our Lady. That's where the Islamic folks got the idea, from Christendom's bell ringing. They stole it, and now they do it in the wrong direction. This was done for the success of the First Crusade against the Islamic terrorists of the day. In 1318 and again in 1327, Pope John XXII urged that this pious practice should be extended to the universal church in his Bull of Avignon in 1318 and his Bull Salutatorium Illud Ave Maria of 1327, official bulls of the church, in other words. King Louis XI, so inspired by this, requested that in addition to the morning and evening chimes, the bells should be rung at midday as well, to pray then that Our Lady would intercede for them. In 1456, 3 years after the capture of Constantinople by the Turks, Pope Calixtus III extended this noon recitation of the Angelus to the entire church for the specific intention of, quote, for the conversion of Islam and for peace. Now, I remember those bells ringing every day in my neighborhood when I was a kid. I'm not sure how many of you remember. Younger ones probably don't. But it's interesting, we don't hear them anymore. And since those bells, after the Second Vatican Council, began not to be sounded 3 times a day for the Angelus call, what's happened? Islam has been on a rampage ever since. Coincidence? Maybe, but I doubt it. A couple more and then we'll move on. After the Christian knights, after they were delivered at Malta on the Nativity of the Virgin Mary, of course, that's the feast day from which they were delivered, Solomon the Magnificent, who was upset, and he sensed that he was up against not mere human adversaries. He sensed that they had a divine assistance that was, in a sense, cheating, because he couldn't beat them and he couldn't figure out why, because he had superior numbers and weaponry. And so there's this great little line. He writes of Pope Pius V, Saint Pope Pius V, the Pope who canonized traditional Latin Mass, who canonized the Rosary. Some people don't know that. He's the one that canonized, made official, the 15 decades of the Rosary. Solomon the Magnificent had this to say about this rosary-peddling Pope of ours. He said, I fear that little man. I fear that little man and his rosary more than I do the weapons of his soldiers. And he had good reason to fear Pius V, because what was coming? Of course, the Battle of Lepanto, the best example of what Our Lady can do when she gets her ire up a little bit. I mean, St. Dominic, 400 years before Our Lady's battle at Lepanto, he's born in Burgos in 1170, and he had been, intimately aware of the threat of the Moors on the peninsula, including in his own province, and so he had developed this fear, this need to appeal to Our Lady to protect him, even as a child, to protect him. So he had a profound devotion to the Virgin Mary, as we all know, and it is to him, to Saint Dominic, through the order, the Dominicans that he founded, that we owe now the fact that we're saying rosaries today. The propagation of the rosary is through that channel. Now, here's where it gets interesting. This little pope that the Solomon the Magnificent was so fearful of, he, of course, is what? He's a Dominican. And that is why we have the Battle of Lepanto, because of the Pope's dedication to Our Lady, and specifically the Rosary. He's passionately devoted to the Mother of God, the Pope was, which is why he had medals and rosaries distributed to all the soldiers and all the officers of the Holy League, and exhorted them before they went to battle for daily recitation of the Rosary for the success of their campaign. And this historian, Gabouzy, puts it in an interesting way. He writes, quote, you would then have witnessed at that time these men of war competing to be the very first to comply. Men of war, I think is what he italicized. Men of war, these are battle-hardened men. And what are they competing for? Competing to be the very first to comply with the wishes of the Pope, to confess their sins, to receive the Eucharist, to implore the Queen of Heaven, relying more on her help than on their own instruments of war, end quote, so says the historian. That's how important she was then. And then you know the story. September 15th, 1571, the Feast of Our Lady of the Seven Sorrows is when Don John of Austria left Messina for the east. Everything about this part of history is connected to her. On the morning of Sunday, October 7th, at the entrance of the Gulf of Lepanto, the Christians sighted the Ottoman fleet under the leadership of the Ali Pasha, more than 100,000 men strong. In the midst of all of that, as they face this fleet, knowing that they're woefully outmanned, in the midst of all of that, a silence, a solemn silence is called for among the entire Holy League as their ships, as their flotilla moves forward. A silence is called for. The Christian commanders address then a plea to every ship and every soldier on those boats, a plea to the Lord of hosts and to his blessed mother, Queen of the Holy Rosary, following the directives of the sovereign pontiff who had ordered it so. The rosary was then recited in common, aloud on every ship. Now imagine that scene. They're facing certain death, and all of these men standing, kneeling on the decks of these ships, rosaries in hand, pledging allegiance to Our Lady, knowing the only hope they had was the Queen of Heaven. And the victory, of course, was given to them. Unbelievable. I mean, the story is crazy. It's documented. You can go to any university that would teach history of warfare still talks about this amazing event when the wind suddenly changed. And against impossible odds, the Holy League vanquishes and destroys the enemy. No one saw that coming. She did, because she saw it immediately and told Pope Pius V back in Rome about the victory before anyone else knew. And that too is well documented. So massive was this victory in Christendom that to perpetuate the memory of the victory of Lepanto, Pope Pius V established the feast day of the 7th of October in honor of Our Lady of Victory, which became, of course, Our Lady of the Rosary. That's how much they depended upon her, and they provide for us an example on how much we need to start depending on her as well. One more, and then I promise I'll move on. The deliverance of Vienna, because it's another story that's just like it. They're in the same situation that we are. They're literally losing their borders. They're losing their faith. And so they appeal to her. And it's the same then with the deliverance of Vienna. 1683, the Turks are besieging that capital city of the Habsburg Empire. A little nun from the monastery of St. Severus in Rome, wrote to Pope Innocent XI to advise him that in order to triumph over the Muslims, the Turks, he should have numerous rosary recited in the Church of Our Lady of Victory. The great pontiff agrees to this. He had great devotion to Our Lady anyway, and he also decrees that all convents, all monasteries, all churches in Rome should join in seeking the intercession of the Virgin Mary. The stage was set because the imperial city of Vienna at this point had been blockaded for months and it was on the verge of falling, of surrender. This would have been the fall of the Holy Roman Empire. As 150,000 Turks advanced to the gates of that city, and the emperor now had fled. So on that feast day then, at the Assumption of Our Lady, Jan Sobieski, King of Poland, mounted his charger and he headed to Vienna. On the Sunday in the octave of the Virgin, of the Nativity of the Virgin Mary, September 12th, 1683, Sobieski has a mass celebrated, which he serves the entire time with his arms outstretched like a cross. After receiving communion, Sobieski rises at the end of the sacrifice of the Mass and literally shouts, "Let us march! Let us march with confidence under the protection of heaven and with the assistance of the Most Holy Virgin Mary, Mother of God." And the battle was on, and his hopes were not in vain. All the way down through history, she's intervened on behalf of those who believed in her. And she will do so again today, I'm convinced. I think the fact that Russia is doing things that are not predictable right now could well have something to do with the faith of people in this room. Those of us who've tried through it all to keep the faith and continue to pray the rosary every night. Maybe Our Lady is softening a little bit and at least allowing for a situation in which Russia would be receptive to the graces needed for conversion. Who knows? But there's no reason to give up hope. we have every reason to continue to go to Our Lady. At Fatima, she's merely being consistent when she asks for the rosary, because she knows. She knows what will happen if enough people, as Sister Lucy said, if enough people comply. So nothing is more important then than obedience to Our Lady of Fatima. Not ecumenism, not this pointless, everlasting, silly, stupid dialogue for dialogue's sake with other religion has no point. It certainly is not about converting anyone. It's about perpetual dialogue, perpetual ecumenism. They don't care about conversion. They don't like conversion. They've condemned conversion and proselytism, right? So that's not going to be the answer. That's not the answer. Nothing is more important to us then, as Catholics, than compliance with this message of Our Lady of Fatima. And yet, the consecration of Russia still hasn't happened. The full text of the third secret of Fatima is still not released. Even Mother Angelica admitted that, remember, right out of the gate, when she said, I'm with those who don't think we got the whole third secret of Fatima. And I agree with her. Everybody wonders about that. It's so full of holes and inconsistencies. I don't believe we've gotten the true third secret of Fatima. Why not? Preaching the rosaries. When's the last time anybody in a Novus Ordo church heard a pastor preach rosary, preach First Saturdays, preach scapular? Reparation. It's not being preached anymore. Christendom is not preaching the crusade anymore. They're not preaching allegiance to Our Lady. Why? Why not? You wonder why our world is burning up. Isn't it obvious? We've lost the faith. We've lost faith in her, or so it would seem. Why would they just pay lip service to Our Lady, the terror of demons, the vanquisher of infidels, the mother of God, when today the enemy is not just at the gates, the enemy is inside the cities, it's inside our churches, it's inside our homes. And I guess the question to ask, is it because? Are we ignoring Our Lady because the church herself now has lost faith in the Mother of God, has become unfaithful to the traditions of the church founded by her son? In April of 1990, Silvio Cardinal Oddi told Lucio Brunelli of 30 Days magazine that he thought that the third secret had everything to do with the Second Vatican Council. You can Google this. I'm not going to read it all because I know we're a little short on time. Very interesting interview. He knew Pope John XXIII personally, and he said he did not believe that perestroika, the lightening up, the wall coming down, had anything to do with the third secret of Fatima or the consecration of Russia that hadn't happened. He believed, Cardinal Oddi believed, that the third secret of Fatima predicts the Second Vatican II, the Second Vatican Council, upheaval, a council in the church that would do grave damage. So if that's true, if we have cardinals, and many cardinals believe that, many bishops believe that, and priests believe that, so if it's possible, if that's true, could it possibly be that Our Lady of Fatima herself now, her message, her prophecy, her warnings, that all of it is out of sync with the spirit of Vatican II and the new orientation of the church and the synodal church that we keep hearing about and the church of accompaniment they keep babbling on and on about? She doesn't fit in their vision, in their orientation of the Catholic Church, so she's being pushed out. Her message is being pushed out, and to the extent that they're successful in pushing her out, our children then are threatened by what's happening to the world that is no longer being told that they must appeal to the Mother of God. But you wonder, is that the problem? Pope Francis himself is now saying things like, atheists, yeah, they can go to heaven, sure. What a message. We all understand that. What's God going to do with an atheist? That's up to God. But the way he presented that left the whole world going, wow, you don't have to be Catholic anymore. Even atheists can go to heaven. That's a Jesuitical way of doing something. He undermined the church in that and what must be done in order to be saved. And then he says, who am I to judge? Homosexuals. He was talking about priests in that case. How does any of this fit in with Fatima when we have a pope saying these sort of things? Because Our Lady has some very specific things to say about what happens to sinners, right? Some very frightening things to say. Exactly 100 years ago today, the Mother of God appears to the children, and little Lucia asks a question. She says to the Mother of God, "What does your grace want of me?" And Our Lady says, "I have come to ask you to come for the 6 months in succession on the 13th day in the same hour. Later on I will tell you who I am and what I want. Afterwards I will return yet a 7th time." And Lucia, again, a little child, is curious. She says, "Will I go to heaven?" It's kind of funny that she just jumps to this kind of non sequitur. "Great. Will I go to heaven, by the way?" And Our Lady says, "Yes, you will." And Jacinta, asks Lucia, also. And Francisco, also. But he will have to say many rosaries. I remembered then to ask about two girls, says Lucia, who had died recently. They were friends of mine, and they used to come to my home to learn weaving with my elder sisters. So Lucia asked Our Lady, is Maria das Neves already in heaven? Yes, she is, says Our Lady. It seems to me that she was 16 years old, says Lucia, and she said, and Amelia? 16-year-old kid living in Fatima, and Our Lady's answer should put the fear of God in all of us. Her answer is, yes, she will be in purgatory until the end of the world. Now, we're talking about a young peasant girl living in Fatima 100 years ago. This is pre-internet. This is pre-sex education, pre-sex, drugs, and rock and roll. What could she possibly have been doing to put her in purgatory until the end of time? And yet this is what Our Lady tells us. Salvation is not easy. Our Lord said it's by the sweat of your brow, right? That's what Catholics used to be taught. You had to do things. You had to play along with what the rules were in order to save your soul. Our Lady brings this home by that until the end of time. So this little child, this girl, is in purgatory today, right now, suffering in purgatory. While our Pope, and indeed our priests and our bishops all over the world, are assuring us that atheists go to heaven, public adulterers can go to communion, Protestants are just fine, traditionalists can go to hell, but everybody else is fine. How can we reconcile this new and improved Catholic Christian thing that we're hearing every day? How do we reconcile that with Our Lady of Fatima and her dire warnings to repent, to convert, to offer sacrifice, and to pray for poor sinners? It's impossible. What we're seeing, in other words, with Fatima and the post-conciliar Church of Vatican II are irreconcilable differences. And that's why they're silencing her. They play lip service to her. But they're silencing her and they're not complying because they don't agree with her. The new orientation of the Church is more important. Our Lady of Fatima gave no indication that all religions are more or less the same, which is the message that Catholics today are getting loud and clear. She gave no indication that God's laws on marriage, for example, can somehow change. If you've got a really tough situation going on, you can get divorced, sure, and remarried. Our Lady of Fatima doesn't seem to hint on any of this, but essentially that we don't need to worry because, I don't know, sustainable development and Jeffrey Sachs and the United Nations and climate change are much more important than the kingship of Christ. I don't think I'm exaggerating. Isn't this what we're all hearing? We're not hearing anything about the kingship of Christ or the necessity of converting to the Catholic. We're hearing about climate change. And we're hearing about the United Nations and how important it is to go along with their child-hating, family-destroying agenda. It's insane. I can't believe how far it's gone at this point, and yet we still don't turn to Our Lady. And yet what I'm describing and what we're all living through, this is the demonic deception that is fundamentally at odds with the message of Fatima. And whether we like it or not, this deception has found its way into our beloved Church. It's the smoke of Satan that Paul VI saw entering the sanctuary. It is the errors of Russia that Our Lady warned against. And anyone who objects to it is a rad trad, too rigid, a prophet of doom. Oh, the horror. This room is full of prophets of doom, or you wouldn't be here. Remember the famous prophets of doom, by the way? That's how the Second Vatican Council got started. Pope John the 23rd, October 11th, 1962, when he says, and this is the opening address of the Second Vatican Council, "We feel that we must disagree with these prophets of doom, who are always forecasting worse disasters, as though the end of the world were at hand," end quote. That's the spirit in which the council began. Now, you tell me, how do we reconcile that with what happened a few years earlier in the same century? Quote, "If people attend to my requests, Russia will be converted and the world will have peace. If not, Russia will spread its errors throughout the world, fomenting wars and persecution of the Church. The good will be martyred, the Holy Father will have much to suffer, and various nations will be annihilated." Is John the 23rd talking about Our Lady when he's talking about the prophet? Who was a bigger prophet of doom in the 20th century than Our Lady of Fatima, warning about the annihilation of entire nations? And he says we need to dismiss that. That's not what we're all about. She showed the children a vision of hell, remember? Of course, there's nobody in hell. It may exist, but there's nobody in hell, right? Well, not according to Our Lady of Fatima, because she showed them a vision of hell which was populated quite nicely. So what do we do with that? We even had John Paul suggesting that hell may exist, but nobody's in it. That's the new von Balthasarian thing that everyone's accepting. A good God, a merciful God, would never send anyone to hell, not forever. That message is so loud and clear, and if that isn't the biggest error of Russia, quote unquote, that we could come up with, I don't know what would be. So Our Lady is talking about repentance and conversion. Pope Francis is talking about how evil proselytism is, and we just can't have any of that. It's really dangerous, and it kind of hurts the feelings of our dialogue partners because they don't understand, so don't talk that way. Cardinal Walter Casper, who is now considered the Pope's theologian, head of the Congregation for Preventing Christian Unity for so many years, he led a crusade, and you remember this, back to 10 years ago, a positive crusade against 400,000 Anglicans that wanted to join the Catholic Church because their little ship was going under so badly. Casper wanted to stop them, and he's in charge. He's the Vatican guy in charge of Christian unity. He didn't want it, and he told the Catholic Herald he didn't want it. He said, "Today we no longer understand ecumenism in the sense of return, by which the others would be converted and return to being Catholics. This was expressly abandoned by Vatican II," so says the Pope's theologian. So according to the princes of the Church, Vatican II is clearly at odds with Our Lady of Fatima's message. Now, I don't know exactly what we're going to do about this other than keep the faith and make people aware of what's happening as best, like a conference like this. Make people aware that our church has been infiltrated. There's no question in my mind and anyone else's mind who's paying attention, it's been infiltrated. And that those who infiltrated our church are every bit as ruthless when it comes to destroying Christ's church and salvific plan as were the Bolsheviks, the Leninists, the Stalinists in the last century. Those who have infiltrated our church no longer seem to believe that the Catholic Church is the only true church outside of which there can be no salvation, let alone that the rosary, penance, and conversion play a role in world peace, a far greater role than their endless ecumenical dialogue and their precious spirit of Vatican II. So in the meantime, the errors of Russia continue to spread unabated throughout the whole world, and we're living through it every day. Chick-fil-A wanted to set up a restaurant at the Jesuit-run Fordham University. And because a couple of people sporting rainbow banners, students on that Catholic Jesuit university, because they didn't like it, because they protested, the Jesuits banned Chick-fil-A. A Protestant chicken peddler who had the temerity to tell a Baptist newspaper that he believes marriage is between one man and one woman. The Jesuits, the sons of St. Ignatius of Loyola, banned this Protestant guy. Chick-fil-A, in other words, and Mr. Cathy, or whatever his name that runs it, he's more Catholic than the Jesuits. Now, those are the errors of Russia. Those errors of Russia are spreading everywhere. You saw the AP poll that discovered in the public school system 20,000 cases, reported cases of sexual abuse going on. I'm not going to get into those details at all. They're kids here, but you look into that poll. The public school system is so rotten to the core now that the Associated Press recommended a possible option: homeschool your kids. I never thought, as a homeschool father, I never thought I'd see the day. That's how bad things are now. And these indoctrination camps of the New World Order called our public school system, those are the errors of Russia. Atheism now, the fastest growing religion in the world. In other words, democracies are doing exactly what the communist regimes sought to do at the point of a gun, all for the last century. Drive Christ Church underground or into concentration camps, they don't care which, as long as we shut up. I'm the leader of a hate group. My website is being banned all the time in Europe. Why? Who knows? It's a hate site. You defend marriage, and I'm talking about somebody who's doing it right now, not somebody that I know of. But as a person who cites church infallible teachings in defense of marriage, that will get you labeled as a hate site, and eventually, it's already happening to me, your site will be blocked by filters, all sorts of mysterious filters that you can't do much about. It's already happening. It's happening very quickly, in fact. And as the modern world moves further from the cross, from the very idea of God, and again, we talk about the errors of Russia, this is exactly what Karl Marx demanded what must happen when he said, the very idea of God, quote, is the keynote of a perverted civilization, and it must be destroyed. So the errors of Russia are not just one political or economic system. They are rather a systematic and a systemic series of non-serviums, just like the one that Karl Marx pointed out when he wrote, "Our war is against God and the world created by God." The errors of Russia are the full frontal assault on the family. They include now militant gender ideology, gender politics, transgenderism, and in other words, a war on the very idea that God created us man and woman. They include the uncrowning of Christ the King and the enslavement of the masses to sex, drugs, and meaningless labor right now in the world today everywhere, to the point where a Catholic family cannot even have a mother to stay home and raise her own children half the time because they're so financially strapped that they can't even do it in this utopia, new world order of ours. Now, we all know these problems, but the question is, we're not going to back down. We're not going to surrender. We're not going to give up. In other words, we need to fight. We need to come up with a strategy, just like the Crusaders of old did, and it starts with a conference like this. It starts with the message of Our Lady of Fatima. How do we survive? How do we defend ourselves? How do we keep the faith? How do we keep those errors of Russia at bay? It all starts with a simple plan that even a child can understand, and from there it goes out to homeschooling and to counter-revolutionary activities and supporting newspapers and conferences and whatnot, spread the word. But it starts with an idea any child can understand. It starts with an idea that was given by the Mother of God to 3 little children. It's called the Rosary, the Scapular, the first Saturday's penance and reparation. In other words, stand with the Mother of God. And if we don't do this, as Sister Lucy said, then we will be enslaved. So we either believe her, we believe the Mother of God, or we don't. Here are Sister Lucy's words to Thomas Walsh in 1946. Quote, "Unless a sufficient number comply with Our Lady's demands, every nation in the entire world without exception will be enslaved." You know what she's talking about? That's the New World Order. She sees the New World Order. Our Lady came to stop the New World Order. Every nation without exception will be enslaved. And if we don't want to be enslaved, if we don't want to see our children and grandchildren enslaved in apostasy and immorality, then, ladies and gentlemen, we must return to Fatima, get down on our knees, and stay there. Our Lady, this is by way of conclusion, it's a beautiful thought borrowed partially from Fulton Sheen. She points to the sun, does she not, when the great miracle of the sun takes place in Fatima, proving to 70,000 at least that were there on hand that something amazing was happening. She points to the sun. And Fulton Sheen says, "As our love does not start with Mary, so neither does it stop with Mary. God, who made the sun, also made the moon. The moon does not take away from the brilliance of the sun. The moon would only be a burnt-out cinder floating in the immensity of space if it were not for the sun. All its light is reflected from the sun. Our Blessed Mother reflects her divine Son. Without him, she is nothing. With him, she is the mother of men. On dark nights, we are grateful for the moon. When we see it shining, we know there must be a sun. So in this dark night of the world, when men turn their backs on him, who is the light of the world, we look to Mary to guide their feet while we await the sunrise." I can't end on any better note than that, other than to stress my own positivity and my own confidence in Our Lady, in the moon. I do not want to end as one who thinks that we are going to lose this war. We're not going to lose this war. Keep the old faith. God bless you. And Our Lady of Fatima, pray for us. Thank you.